Portfolio withdrawals in an absence of knowing what someone wants to spend are meaningless. Understanding how much we can withdraw is useful as a kind of guiding principle, but really what matters is, can I withdraw enough in a sustainable, safe way to cover my desired spending for the entirety of retirement? I want to start today by going into what I see as the biggest booby trap or the biggest pitfall that people encounter when thinking about this incorrectly, and that leads to strain on their portfolio or their retirement plan and ultimately uncertainty and anxiety in retirement itself. This concept I'm going to show on the whiteboard here. Hopefully I've got a better marker today, better lighting, so you guys can tell me in the comments and let me know if this is easier to see, but the framing should be okay here. But this concept is, I think, the most important foundational concept in portfolio withdrawals. And this is a concept called grossing up. So the issue that this is going to illustrate is when we're working and going through our normal life, we receive what are called net of tax paychecks. So if I'm getting paid by Peak Financial Planning, what I end up in my wife and my bank account is the net of tax pay, right? So thank you. Yes, I tried. So I get my net of tax payment into my bank account, and I think about what I live on as my net of tax spending money. And that's because my employer, in this case, Peak Financial Planning, will withhold the taxes from my pay on my behalf. So I never really have to think about what's the right amount, is it too much, too little, what's happening here. But in retirement, we are responsible for producing our own income. And so we also have to now start thinking of tax as a true expense in retirement. And this is what's going to lead into this concept that's basics on the board here, which is, if I want to spend $100,000, I want to spend $120,000 in my retirement or annually in retirement. And that's stuff I want and need to spend. I need to figure out what amount I withdraw in order to obtain a net $120,000, meaning how do I end up with $120,000 of actual spending money after taxes are accounted for? Because taxes are an expense in retirement, and now I, as the retiree, am responsible for managing that expense. So this is a concept called grossing up, which is basically I take how much I want to spend. So what's my desired spending? And then I need to say, okay, based on the income, based on the withdrawal source, is it IRA? Is it post-tax? Roth? Is it a gift, right? All of them are going to have different kind of tax elements to it in the sense of like how much money is left for me to spend based on how I receive it. For the sake of the simplest two examples, we'll do one quick tax-free example and one quick all pre-tax example. The pre-tax example is the most common one that retirees are going to encounter. They're going to have pre-tax savings in the IRA or 401k. They're going to need to withdraw enough from a pre-tax balance in order to meet this $120,000. We're going to have to gross that up, meaning figure out how much tax am I going to owe as a result of this $120K. Now, you should use an actual tax calculator for this. I'm just going to do a bloated nonsense example. This is not real math. But let's just say I withdraw $120K from a pre-tax account. I want $120K of after-tax money from a pre-tax account. Well, I have to withdraw at least $120K. I'm going to probably have to withdraw close to $135,000 or maybe $137,000, depending on the state I live in, because state tax will occur. And we can do grossing up by basically using a formula that says, if I know my marginal tax bracket or my effective tax rate, it's better to use your effective tax rate. If I know what my effective tax rate is going to be, I can take this dollar amount right here and divide it by 1 minus that number. So if I do that on an actual calculator here, we take 120,000. Let's just say my effective tax rate is that 17%. Divide that by 0.83. And it tells me that my grossed up number is 144,578. Now, that's probably not likely to be anyone's actual number with that amount of actual pre-tax withdrawals, because you have the standard deduction, you might have bonus senior deductions. Tax brackets are actually pretty low. You're going to start in the 10% federal, then the 12%. 12% bracket's pretty wide if you're married. So this is actually probably way more than someone would actually need to withdraw to produce 120K. But for the sake of the example, it just illustrates the core concept, which is that I need 144,000 of withdrawals in order to satisfy this 120K of desired spending money. So I have to count this $24,000 as an expense in retirement. And this is really important, especially if you're using like a guardrails system or a dynamic spending system or withdrawal system, because we really have to get the math right for this, because there are 3 ways that we can have a required quality of life reduction in retirement. One is through portfolio performance, negative portfolio performance. The second is through a mix of negative portfolio performance and withdrawals, which are kind of basically a negative rate of return. The third is through large, sudden withdrawals or sudden expenses. So if we just forget to include our taxes as an expense each year, and what we think is where we get a spending capacity, a safe spending recommendation of 120K, we think we're okay. We forget to gross up for taxes and find out if that's possible. And then every year at the end of the year, we're like, oh, I actually withdrew 144,000 because I had to pay 24,000 in taxes. Year by year, we're eating into our lower guardrail, getting closer and closer to a quality of life reduction. And overall, just actually reducing the probability that our plan works out correctly because we've neglected to factor in tax as an expense. So that is the first and most important, in my opinion, fundamental in terms of planning for portfolio withdrawals. Now, the post-tax example doesn't even need an example, because let's say all of your money comes from Roth, or all of it comes from a post-tax bucket where your actual taxable income would fall beneath the 0% capital gains bracket. You would just withdraw your 120K. Now, real life is obviously more textured in the sense that you're probably going to have a blend of things. You're going to have a blend of post-tax money that has some cost basis. You're going to have a blend of pre-tax money, and you're going to figure out the best way to actually do that. And this video today is not specifically about sequence of withdrawals. It's just illustrating how am I thinking about portfolio withdrawals specifically, because we're going to connect this next to market issues like withdrawal rates. Like, what's a sustainable withdrawal amount and a sustainable withdrawal rate in retirement, such that I don't put too much risk on my retirement and end up in a bad position. So that is, in my opinion, portfolio withdrawal concept number one that every retiree should know going into retirement and planning for. Now, some retirement plans make this more explicit. Some retirement planning softwares make this more explicit. Some make it less explicit. So it can be helpful, but different retirement planning tools can kind of give you a crutch or a handicap in this regard, but it does depend. All right, let's go to item number 2. And look at this, really, truly impressive preparation today. I think you guys will all give me credit for this, but I actually prepped the backside of the whiteboard, knowing that I was going to go into 2 additional subjects. So we're gonna go with this truly impressive presentation format of having 2 sides of the whiteboard. So the second thing that matters, I think, here is that is a common concern with portfolio withdrawals is like, okay, is it sustainable? How do I handle bad things that happen in retirement? Specifically, the primary major concern, excuse me, y'all, is what happens with bad markets? Like, how does sequence of returns affect me? So a really quick 1 minute definition of sequence of returns. Sequence of returns is the specific term for when a retiree who is now withdrawing money from their retirement accounts, which counts as a negative rate of return. If I withdraw 4% from my retirement account, I have a negative 4% growth rate. Now, I might have market returns of 7%, and the net, the difference between those two produces a 3% total return, but my withdrawals are technically a negative growth rate. The reason this is important, because when we have bad market returns in addition to withdrawals occurring from the portfolio, we end up with this concept called sequence of returns. And what it really does is it's almost like a compounding effect to the downside. It's a negative compounding effect. Now, the reason that's significant and why it is worth fearing is because we obviously don't have a lot of leeway for mistakes in retirement. And the common concern in retirement is going to be, well, if a market correction happens, how badly will it affect me, and what should I do about it? Okay, so let me illustrate sequence of returns really quickly. I have a great video on this on the channel that includes a calculator that you guys can download. I could not tell anyone the title of that video. I'd have to go back and look through the hundreds of video archive. But if you have the wherewithal and the stamina to go back through the video archives, or happen to be watching this and have watched that one recently, maybe you could put a comment with the link to that video in this comments below, but that's a high hope. But basically, sequence of returns works the following way. So let me switch sides here. Let's say we have a starting $1 million portfolio. And we have a 10% correction or a 10% reduction in portfolio value, our new portfolio balance would be 900,000. Now, let's say we also have a 4% withdrawal rate on that. All right, so I know this is all chicken scratch, so it's actually probably too far from the thing here, but maybe that makes it more legible. But let's say we have a 4% withdrawal rate. What this does is it combines to become a negative 14% rate of return on the portfolio. And so if we have this sequence of events occur, we have $1 million starting balance at the beginning of the year. We do our withdrawal. We have our market correction. We end up with 860,000 in ending balance at the end of the year. All right. Now, this is where sequence of returns becomes illustrated. In order to get back to $1 million, and you guys can take a guess in the chat. I'd love to see if somebody has already done this. I bet there's a lot of you. You guys are all serious consumers of retirement content. I bet there's quite a few people who already know this. What rate of growth, one annualized rate of growth, would you need to go from 860,000 back to $1 million over 1 year? Let's just assume we could control the market. We want to get back to our starting $1 million balance. What rate of return would we need in order to get there? I'm going to give everybody a second before I actually demonstrate it on this whiteboard. But the reason I'm explaining this is because it's actually quite significant to understand that compounding to the upside and compounding to the downside both happen. And compounding to the downside is the dangerous part that everyone's actually, I think, reasonably fearful of, or should be reasonably fearful of. Yeah, exactly. So the Mr. Chow OU812. Thank you for throwing that in the chat. Yeah, that's it's the point is it's not about the right number. It's that it's more than 14%, right? We have a negative 14% growth rate, and it will be more than 14% growth to get back to $1 million because we start with a new principal amount. We're not starting with $1 million. So I think a lot of the times, and I've seen this happen in consultations and with clients, we think to ourselves, if I lost 14%, I just need to gain 14% back. Well, that's not true. You have to always, if you lose a certain percent, you end up with a new starting principal or a new starting invested balance. And you have to calculate the growth rate off that new starting invested balance in order to get to the original amount. So, I can do a quick math calculation here just to solve this for us all and put us out of our misery here. And the answer is it's very close to 17%. It's not exactly 17, but you're very close to the right answer, Mr. Chow. It's just under 17% rate of growth. Now, the reason that matters is because if we can use, that's a fair point. Actually, it's a fair point. Accounting for inflation, that's fine. That's a fine way to think about it. The purpose of this is really illustrative more so. It's just to say we need a 3% greater return roughly than our loss in order to get there. Now, if we take the S&P 500 average rate of return over 100 years, which is about it's just over 8%. The question is, how many years does it take to get back to that starting balance? We could do this type of illustration for all sorts of withdrawal rates and negative growth rates. And this relationship gets a lot worse the larger the market correction, the larger the portfolio value reduction. At 30%, if you had a 30% market correction, no withdrawal rate at all, let's just say 30% market correction, you would need a 42% rate of growth to get back to your starting principal. At 40%, you need a much more significant one. And at 50%, you need an incredibly significant one. Now, obviously, the likelihood of those types of drawdowns are very low. But the point is just to illustrate, this is why people fear it. So how does this connect to portfolio withdrawals? Well, basically, portfolio withdrawals or having a system for portfolio withdrawals is the best mitigation tool that you can control for a sequence of returns. I'm actually going to be putting out a video next week on, I believe it's Wednesday, that talks about this in detail. So that's a bit of a call out to that. But the point in saying is, we always wonder to ourselves, what is our actual lever of control? And our lever of control is behavior. There are two behaviors. The primary one will be spending reductions, quality of life reductions that we can accept in retirement. So it's how much would I be willing to cut my spending if my portfolio were to drop below a certain point. You guys have seen me beat that topic endlessly, I'm sure, on my channel talking about guardrails. But the reason I love guardrails is because it's a behavior we can control. It puts the power in the people's hands. And I think that is by far the best way to reduce anxiety, is to have a tool we can deploy. There is a second tool. The second tool is our portfolio. Now, we have less control over our portfolio than we might be led to believe, but there are some levers of control. And I'm actually going to end up going way too long if I go into detail about that. So I'm going to leave this concept here on a cliffhanger, and I'm going to promise to address this in my next portfolio withdrawal conversation. I do have videos on market participation on my channel if you want to see them. I think there's a video on there that says how I would construct a $2 million portfolio, and it shows this concept of market participation. But the basic idea is we can, through some, it's not about investment selection specifically, it's more about understanding investment risk and having a backtesting methodology. We can manage our portfolio's exposure to the market, knowing certain details about its investment risk that will allow us to reverse engineer some hoped outcomes. So I'm going to leave that on a cliffhanger and promise to do market participation in a future video, but hopefully this was helpful. I guess I'm definitely not closing the loop on this, but I don't want this to be one long talking head YouTube video. I want to quickly answer some questions here from commenters who've left comments on the channel, and then see if I can address questions for those of you that have the guts and fortitude to stick around with me rambling for 45 or 50 minutes. So with that said, thank you for listening to me talk about portfolio withdrawals. Real quick, let me show you the exact 3-pillar comprehensive retirement roadmap that takes retirees from uncertainty to peace of mind that less than 1% of retirees actually have in place. Now, I've built hundreds of these for retirees, and I can say with a high degree of confidence that these are the 3 pillars every retiree needs to have in place in order to have full confidence that they're not missing anything in their retirement plan. And I broke each of these down by the specific questions. You can see them here that each needs to be answered and the best way to answer them. Now, we've done this across pre-retirees, recent retirees, married couples, single retirees, $1 million portfolios, $10 million portfolios, all the above, and it works. And it's my gift to you today. It's absolutely free. It's in the first link in the description below this video. It's going to say free comprehensive retirement roadmap training. Just click the link, enter your info, and you'll get instant access all for free.